Welcome to the Fact Hunter channel. We're glad you're with us and welcome to our next video titled, Scuba Divers vs. Warships. Shortly after dusk, on the cold evening of December 3, 1941, the Italian submarine, Sire, sailed from the port of La Spezia, Italy, in great secrecy. This is because it was necessary to give the impression that the vessel was setting out on a routine training cruise. In reality, the ship was carrying out a mission that was likely to become a historic feat or a high-profile disaster. On board the Sire were 6 Italian frogmen. Their secret task was to blow up and sink the 2 largest ships of the British fleet. Queen Elizabeth, Valianta, anchored in the port of Alexandria, more than 5,000 kilometers from La Spezia. Admiral Andrew B. ABC Cunningham, the capable commander of the British Mediterranean Fleet, was confident that the 2 powerful ships were secure from hostile attack from the sea. The port was well protected and vigilantly guarded. 9 kilometers in front of the harbor entrance, several circular minefields were placed, detonated remotely at a depth of 8 meters. Exactly opposite the port were the cables of an automatic alarm system. Mother Nature also helped secure the port by placing a natural barrier of numerous sandbanks around the entrance, forcing incoming ships to pass through a narrow channel. Moreover, the Great Harbor was separated from the open sea to the west by a breakwater several kilometers long, and to the east by a second, slightly shorter one. The gap between the breakwaters was about 180 meters. This entrance was protected at night by 3 strong anti-submarine nets. At regular intervals, small British cutters patrolled the passage, occasionally dropping depth bombs. Armed towers along the breakwaters were manned with guards. At night, the harbor was illuminated several kilometers out to sea by many searchlights. As a last safeguard against submarines, nets were deployed around the Queen Elizabeth and Valiant. There were constant guards on both vessels. Now in the darkness a few kilometers beyond La Spezia, the Sire met the ferry, from which 3 strange-looking objects, each about 4.5 meters long and 60 centimeters in diameter, were transferred to specially built watertight containers attached to the hull of the submarine. These objects were secret Italian inventions, torpedoes that could be steered by 2 people sitting perched on them. Powered by an almost inaudible engine, the torpedo had a speed of about 5.5 kilometers per hour and a range of about 18 kilometers. It could float on the surface or a maximum of about 2.7 meters underwater. A warhead was placed on the bow, which could be detached by releasing the propeller and then attached to an enemy ship by means of a rope pulled through a ring on the bow or hull of the ship. At this point, we would like to thank all the listeners of our channel. Thank you for being, and at the same time, we want to ask you to help us develop the Fact Hunter channel by subscribing to our channel. This will motivate us on our way to making more and more interesting and better listenings and videos. Thank you for being with us. In the rear of the torpedo seat was an important piece of equipment: steel pincers, magnetic clamps for attaching the warhead to the hull, and a compressed air net jack. There were 6 torpedo drivers aboard the Sire, who called their vehicles mildly pigs. They had been training for their action for several months. Technicians from the Italian Navy built an accurate model of the port of Alexandria, taking into account all the details important from a frogman's perspective, especially the complex defensive measures. 3 torpedoes, each led by 2 divers, were to penetrate the port of Alexandria. Leading the attack was 27-year-old Lieutenant Luigi Durand de la Penne. Together with his companion, senior sailor Emilio Bianchi, he was to attack the Valiant. Captain Antonio Marcheglia and senior sailor Spartaco Shergat were assigned the Queen Elizabeth. Captain Vincenzo Martelot and Sergeant Mario Marino should take care of the aircraft carrier. After a 15-day voyage through stormy winter waters, Sire arrived at its destination and surfaced at periscope depth after nightfall. The port of Alexandria was about 3.5 kilometers away. At the same time, a second Italian submarine arrived near Rosetta, at the mouth of the Nile, flowing into the Mediterranean slightly east of Alexandria. The second unit was to wait and take over the 6 divers, who should find a fishing boat and row back to the submarine. Shortly after 8 in the evening, the divers on Sire put on their diving suits. On top, they put on breathing apparatuses, called Davis braces. Ironically, these special pieces of equipment were patented in England. The submarine surfaced and the 6 divers jumped out through the hatch onto the slippery platform, efficiently pulling the torpedoes from their containers and pushing them into the water. As the 6 divers mounted their vehicles, Sire hastily submerged. Steering the torpedoes proved much easier than expected. Although the British made the harbor an impregnable fortress with great ingenuity, the tall lighthouse on the shore swept the area with its strong beam. Lieutenant de la Penne, commander of the intruders, used the light of the lighthouse to guide torpedoes along the coast. The divers could even distinguish the silhouettes of the guards on the breakwaters. At the narrow entrance to the harbor, between the breakwaters, the divers encountered their first major obstacle: 3 rows of steel mesh just below the water's surface. Diving for a passage, they discovered that explosives were hanging from the mesh. Using a compressed air cutter was impossible. The tool could have caused an explosion. Meanwhile, as if sensing the need to hide the fact that the Italians had reached the barrier, the lantern beam went out. As the 3 torpedoes and their riders emerged, the bright beam suddenly flared again, focusing on the isthmus. De la Penne and his men thought they had been detected. The light, however, was a signal, allowing the troop-filled British ship and its escort to enter the port when the barriers opened. 6 divers on there simply followed the convoy and in a few minutes found themselves, unnoticed, in the harbor. Now the divers split up. De la Penne and sailor Emilio Bianchi headed toward the Valiant, while the other 2 torpedoes sailed toward their own targets. Soon the dark silhouette of Valiant appeared and de la Penne carefully guided the torpedo along the ship's hull at a depth of about 3 meters. When the torpedo reached the center of the ship, an accident occurred. The steel rope wrapped around the propeller and the pig began to sink to the bottom. Looking around, de la Penne noticed that his partner had disappeared. The lieutenant was perplexed and confused. Months of preparation and effort had been in vain. He managed, however, to pull the heavy torpedo through the thick silt and placed it exactly under Valiant. He set the fuse of the explosive-filled warhead and then lost consciousness from the effort. Miraculously, de la Penne surfaced and regained his senses enough to hold on to one of the nearby buoys. The buoy was also held by his missing partner, sailor Bianchi. The lieutenant told him that he had accomplished the mission, as the fuses had been triggered. Soon British guards spotted the 2 divers and took them to Valiant. There de la Penne was harshly interrogated by a British officer, holding a pistol in one hand. He demanded that the purpose of their mission be revealed. The Italian shrugged his shoulders. "It doesn't matter," replied the British officer. "We know why you are here." The 2 men were then locked in an ammunition storage room. Just below him, de la Penne placed a warhead set for imminent explosion. Meanwhile, Captain Antonio Marcheglia and sailor Spartaco Shergad guided their torpedo toward Queen Elizabeth, anchored about 270 meters from Valiant. Pig flashed under the surface, slipping under the steel mesh surrounding the ship. The heavy cargo was placed exactly under the hull. Sailing close to the warship, the 2 frogmen on the torpedo headed for the remote dock. They knew that no one was patrolling it. Near the shore, they sank a torpedo equipped with a self-destruct device. Then they jumped onto the wharf and disappeared into the darkness. At another point in the harbor, Captain Vincenzo Martelot and Sergeant Mario Marino lost hours sailing in search of their target, an aircraft carrier that had sailed away the day before. So they placed their cargoes on the hull of the tanker, Sagona. When they tried to get out through the isthmus, sitting perched on a surfaced torpedo boat, they were spotted and trapped by the guards. The charges were thus laid under the 3 ships. The dark harbor was like extinction, the calm before the storm. On Valiant, Luigi de la Penne looked at his watch. It was 5:45 in the morning. The cargo was due to explode in 20 minutes. The diver asked to see the ship's commander, Captain Charles Morgan, and was led to him. There was no more chance of stopping the explosion, the Italian told the British officer, and suggested to him that he could save the crew. De la Penne was asked again where he had placed the charge. The man refused to provide information. The frogman was then escorted to the ammunition depot, from where his companion, Bianchi, was taken. Now he was alone, waiting to be torn to shreds. De la Penne waited out the last agonizing minutes. His heart was beating wildly, and sweat covered his face. He could have saved himself by revealing the location of the charge, but he didn't want to do that. Suddenly, boom, a powerful explosion rocked Valiant. Sometime later, de la Penne regained consciousness and discovered that he was floating again. The ship broke apart and settled on the shallow bottom. The Frogman struggled to get out onto the deck of the half-sunken ship and came face to face with Captain Charles Morgan. The two enemies simply stood and looked at each other. Shortly thereafter, as the sun came out from behind the eastern horizon, there was another powerful explosion. Queen Elizabeth was torn apart and also came to rest on the bottom. Meanwhile, a third explosion tore off the rudder of Saguenay and severely damaged the destroyer, Jervis Bay, which was standing close to the tanker and taking fuel. At the mouth of the Nile, an Italian submarine waited in vain to intercept the 6 frogmen. They were all captured. They did such damage to the Mediterranean fleet that it was not until 4 months later, in March 1942, that British Prime Minister Winston Churchill notified Parliament of the fate of Valiant and Queen Elizabeth.